Paul Newman was the very definition of a Hollywood icon. With his piercing blue eyes, effortless charm, and that signature half-smile, he captivated audiences for decades. To the public, he was the all-American hero, talented, generous, devoted, and seemingly untouchable. But behind the bright lights and red carpets, there was a side of Newman few truly knew, a side shrouded in secrecy, whispers, and hidden passions that would only come to light near the very end of his life. For years, fans admired not just his films but the man himself. He was celebrated for his humanitarian work, his racing career, and his enduring marriage to Joan Woodward, a union many considered the gold standard in Hollywood relationships. Yet, as with many celebrities, reality often clashed with the picture-perfect image. The glamorous facade masked personal choices that could shock even his most devoted admirers. Hollywood thrives on myth-making, and Newman's life had been carefully curated. Interviews painted him as devoted and steadfast, philanthropic and principled. But those closest to him knew that life behind closed doors was far more complicated. Rumors swirled quietly through studio halls, whispered over private phone calls, and sometimes hinted at in casual gossip columns. Newman's affairs, though never fully exposed during the height of his fame, were a reality that he carried privately, a truth known only to a few. What makes this revelation so gripping isn't just the fact of the affairs themselves, but the timing and the context. Newman waited until the very end to reveal the depths of his personal life, a confession that came with his final reflections, a mix of honesty, regret, and a desire to finally be unmasked. In the twilight of his life, he no longer needed to protect his image or shield his fans from the imperfections of the man they idolized. Instead, he confronted them, offering a glimpse into the real Paul Newman, a man torn between public adoration and private indulgences, a husband and father navigating the messy contradictions of human desire. This tension between perception and reality is what makes Newman's story so fascinating. For decades, the world saw a flawless icon. Behind closed doors, however, the truth was far more human. Flawed, messy, and deeply relatable. His affairs, the relationships that unfolded quietly in the shadows, reveal the duality of celebrity life, the constant battle between public persona and private impulses. Fans are left to reconcile their admiration with the complex reality of a man who was heroic on screen but profoundly human off it. And perhaps that's the most compelling part of Newman's confession. It challenges the mythology of stardom itself. It forces us to ask, how well do we ever truly know someone, even someone as legendary as Paul Newman? Beneath the awards, the fame, and the charm, there was a man wrestling with choices, mistakes, and the inescapable truths of his own humanity. In the glittering world of Hollywood, secrets are never truly hidden. They simply wait for the right moment to surface. Paul Newman's affairs were no exception. Though the public saw a perfect, polished star, insiders knew there were murmurs. Quiet rumors that slipped through the cracks of studio gossip columns and cocktail party conversations. The whispers painted a picture of a man who, despite his seemingly flawless marriage, sought connections and thrills beyond the spotlight. Hollywood has always been a pressure cooker of desire, temptation, and ambition. Stars live under constant scrutiny, yet they crave intimacy and escape. For Newman, this meant balancing his devotion to family with the allure of secret liaisons that offered a private freedom the camera lens could never capture. Friends and colleagues noticed the subtle hints. Late-night calls, unexplained trips, and moments of distant reflection that didn't quite fit the image of the doting husband and devoted father. The industry's reaction was complicated. Some turned a blind eye, understanding that even icons have private lives, messy and unpredictable. Others, more opportunistic, used the whispers as leverage, hints, and thinly veiled threats in business negotiations or social maneuvering. Hollywood, as glamorous as it seemed, thrived on such tension, the thin line between reverence and scandal. And in Newman's case, that line was walked with care, precision, and a sense of inevitability that perhaps only he fully understood. Even close friends struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the stories emerging from shadows. On one hand, Newman remained generous, charismatic, and endlessly loyal in countless ways. On the other, there were glimpses of a man who could not resist temptation, whose private desires led him into territories that would have stunned the average admirer. It wasn't betrayal for the sake of malice. It was the human complexity of a man caught between fame, personal longing, and the heavy expectations of those around him. Hollywood itself seemed to hold its breath. Gossip columns hinted at impropriety without ever naming names. Studio executives quietly tightened contracts, mindful of image and reputation. Fans, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued to celebrate Newman as an ideal. Yet the tension simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that even the brightest stars cast shadows, and that every perfect life carries secrets that are often darker than we imagine. By the time Newman finally admitted the truth, the whispers had evolved into a historical curiosity, an acknowledgement that no celebrity, no matter how revered, is immune to desire, temptation, or moral complexity. Hollywood had reacted in real time with a mixture of fascination, judgment, and muted respect, reflecting the very human struggle to understand the private lives of those we place on pedestals. Newman's story reminds us that in Tinseltown, appearances are everything, but behind every smile lies a private story, a secret chapter that may never fully align with the public narrative. For fans and insiders alike, these whispers are both tantalizing and unsettling, offering a glimpse into the world of fame where the lines between admiration and reality blur, and where the truth, no matter how carefully guarded, eventually emerges. It was a moment that stunned even those closest to him. In the quiet of his final days, Paul Newman chose to confront the truth head-on. No glitz, no Hollywood spin, just honesty. For decades, he had carried the weight of hidden relationships, fleeting romances, and choices that would have shattered the carefully curated public image of a devoted family man. But as mortality approached, the walls came down. He finally admitted what he had long concealed: the affairs, the temptations, and the human flaws that had always existed beneath the surface. What makes these confessions so riveting is the rawness of the timing. Newman didn't speak to journalists or use the platform of social media. He confided in those who mattered most, weaving a narrative that was equal parts apology, reflection, and revelation. It was not the boastful revelation of a self-serving celebrity, but the solemn acknowledgement of a life lived in contradiction. A man revered on screen, yet wrestling with choices that were profoundly human off it. Friends and family who received these admissions were left reeling. The shock wasn't just in the acts themselves, but in the clarity and openness with which Newman recounted them. He did not excuse his actions. He simply presented them as pieces of a complex, imperfect life. In doing so, he challenged everyone around him to confront the messy truth of human nature. That even those who inspire us, even those we consider paragons of virtue, are capable of error, desire, and moral ambiguity. Hollywood, in its usual fashion, braced for the fallout, though by then the confessions were largely private. Those who knew understood that Newman's revelations were less about scandal and more about reconciliation, with himself, with his loved ones, and perhaps with the public that had idolized him for so long. It was a courageous act, a stripping away of pretense, and an unflinching look at the man behind the legend. What emerges from Newman's final admissions is a portrait of duality. On one side, the star, celebrated, philanthropic, unwaveringly talented. On the other, the man, flawed, human, and driven by impulses that fame and fortune could not entirely suppress. His confessions forced a reckoning with the contradictions of stardom, the collision of idealized image and private reality, the tension between public perception and personal truth. For fans, the revelations sparked a mixture of disbelief, empathy, and introspection. How could a man so iconic, so seemingly flawless, harbor secrets so humanly relatable? Newman's honesty invited audiences to reconsider their own assumptions about morality, perfection, and the stories we tell ourselves about those we admire. In a world obsessed with celebrity, his confessions were a stark reminder that everyone has a shadow, and that acknowledging it can be as courageous as any performance on screen. By choosing to speak before death, Paul Newman not only revealed the hidden chapters of his life, but also redefined the way we understand him. Not as a flawless icon, but as a human being who embraced his complexity and ultimately the truth. Even the most carefully guarded secrets have a ripple effect, and Paul Newman's admissions were no exception. The man who had been a symbol of grace and integrity suddenly became a more complicated figure, and those closest to him felt the tremors most intensely. His family, Joe and Woodward, his children, and extended relatives, faced the delicate task of reconciling the man they loved with the choices he had kept hidden for decades. Emotions ran deep. Hurt, confusion, and even betrayal mingled with enduring affection. A complex cocktail only those intimately connected could understand. Friends who had stood by Newman for years found themselves navigating a new reality. The confession of affairs was not just gossip. It was a revelation that reshaped the narrative of their shared experiences. Conversations that once revolved around laughter and camaraderie now carried an undercurrent of reflection. How well can you ever truly know someone? Even someone as charismatic and revered as Paul Newman. The weight of his honesty pressed on those around him, challenging their perception and forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, forgiveness, and human imperfection. Fans, too, were swept into the whirlwind. Social media and online forums erupted with debates, speculation, and emotional responses. Some felt disillusioned, struggling to reconcile the heroic image they had long cherished with the reality of Newman's personal choices. Others expressed empathy, recognizing that his actions reflected human complexity rather than malice. The revelation sparked a cultural conversation about celebrity, morality, and the dichotomy between public image and private life. Newman had become more than an icon. He had become a mirror, reflecting the universal tension between who we are in public and who we are in private. Hollywood insiders reacted with a mixture of intrigue and caution. Executives, co-stars, and collaborators understood the power of such confessions. While they might tarnish the pristine image of a legend, they also humanized him in ways no award or accolade ever could. Rumors that had circulated quietly for decades now took on a different tone. Less about scandal, more about context and understanding. The whispers turned into lessons on the fragility of fame and the complexities that lie behind even the most polished facades. The fallout also carried a quiet, enduring lesson. Truth, no matter how delayed, has the power to reshape legacies. Newman's decision to speak honestly before his passing created a nuanced portrait of a man who was not flawless, but profoundly human. For his family, friends, and fans, the process of grappling with this truth became a journey in itself. A journey through forgiveness, empathy, and the realization that the people we idolize are layered, imperfect, and sometimes deeply conflicted. Ultimately, the impact of Newman's confessions extended far beyond gossip columns or Hollywood chatter. It touched the hearts of those who admired him, forcing them to reconcile admiration with reality and challenging everyone who knew him or thought they knew him to embrace the complicated, often contradictory truth of a life lived fully, passionately, and imperfectly. The question that lingers after Paul Newman's confessions is one of legacy. How do we remember a man whose public image was a near-perfect blend of charm, talent, and generosity, yet whose private life was far more complicated than anyone imagined? Did these revelations tarnish the icon, or did they deepen our understanding of him, adding layers of humanity that no award or accolade ever could? Newman's legacy is a study in duality. On the surface, he remains the celebrated actor, the philanthropist, the devoted father and husband, though, as we now know, the devoted husband aspect was far more nuanced. Beneath that veneer lies a man who grappled with desire, temptation, and the complexities of human emotion. In confessing the truth of his affairs before death, Newman invited the world to witness the full spectrum of his humanity, challenging the simplistic notion that greatness equates to perfection. For Hollywood, the revelation sparked reflection. Newman had long been an exemplar of professionalism, integrity, and elegance in an industry often criticized for its superficiality and cutthroat nature. To see him confess his personal missteps humanized him, transforming the narrative from idolization to a more relatable story of human imperfection. It reminded the industry and fans that even those who seem untouchable carry flaws, contradictions, and secrets that define, rather than diminish, their essence. Fans' reactions were equally complex. Some wrestled with disappointment, struggling to reconcile the image they had admired with the private reality he revealed. Others found themselves inspired, appreciating the courage it took to finally acknowledge truths he had long kept hidden. There is something profoundly human in the act of confession, especially at life's end, and Newman's honesty allowed his admirers to see him not just as a legend on screen, but as a man who, like everyone else, navigated the messy, morally ambiguous terrain of life. Even in death, Newman's confessions continue to provoke discussion, reflection, and analysis. Biographers, historians, and fans alike revisit his life with fresh eyes, examining his relationships, career choices, and public persona through the lens of his final admissions. What emerges is a legacy that is neither wholly perfect nor entirely tarnished. It is real, raw, and enduring. Newman's story becomes a cautionary tale and a tribute simultaneously, a reminder of the tension between public image and private life, and the inevitable human complexity that resides within even the most revered figures. Ultimately, the truth about Paul Newman's affairs does not erase his accomplishments or the love he inspired. Instead, it paints a fuller picture. A man of immense talent and charm, who lived with contradictions, made mistakes, and faced his own humanity with honesty in the final chapter of his life. His legacy, once thought untouchable, is now enriched by a deeper understanding that greatness does not require perfection, and that the courage to face one's truths can be the most compelling part of a life lived in the spotlight. Paul Newman's life was, by any measure, extraordinary. He captivated audiences for decades with his intense performances, effortless charm, and that iconic smile that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. He became the very embodiment of Hollywood legend, the man whose name alone conjured images of grace, talent, and unwavering professionalism. Yet, the story of Paul Newman extends far beyond the silver screen. Behind the awards, the charity work, and the admiration of millions, there existed a private life filled with complexities, contradictions, and choices that would forever challenge the narrative of perfection that so many held dear. The revelation of Newman's affairs, admitted shortly before his death, forces us to confront a fundamental truth about the human experience. No matter how polished the exterior, every person carries hidden chapters, shadows that are often invisible to the world. For decades, Newman curated a public image that seemed untouchable. He was the ideal husband, devoted father, and philanthropic hero, embodying qualities that inspired adoration across generations. And yet, in private, he faced temptations and desires that he chose to navigate discreetly, fully aware that disclosure could shatter perceptions. This duality, the tension between the icon and the man, lies at the heart of Newman's enduring intrigue. His confessions do not diminish his achievements. They humanize them. They remind us that greatness does not require perfection. A man can be generous, talented, and inspiring while simultaneously wrestling with flaws and moral ambiguities. Newman's life, therefore, becomes a lens through which we examine the universal struggle between public persona and private reality. It is a story not just about a Hollywood legend, but about the universal human condition. The complexity of desire, the inevitability of imperfection, and the courage it takes to confront one's own truths. The impact of these revelations on those closest to him cannot be overstated. His family, friends, and colleagues were suddenly tasked with reconciling the man they knew intimately with the man who had lived a private life beyond their sight. For Joan Woodward, his devoted wife, the confession was a seismic moment, a challenge to balance personal hurt with years of shared love, loyalty, and partnership. For his children, it meant viewing their father through a new, more complex lens, understanding that even the most heroic figures are capable of private mistakes. For friends and colleagues, it was a stark reminder that proximity does not always equal comprehension, and that human complexity often lies hidden beneath the most charismatic exteriors. The public's response was equally nuanced. Newman had long been revered as a paragon of virtue in Hollywood, a figure whose fame seemed inseparable from integrity. To learn of his affairs sparked a range of emotions: shock, disappointment, empathy, and ultimately, understanding. Social media, forums, and fan communities buzzed with debate, reflecting the collective struggle to reconcile admiration with reality. Some fans felt disillusioned, others comforted by the acknowledgement that even legends are human. This discourse highlights a crucial point. Celebrity is a shared illusion. We elevate figures like Newman to iconic status, sometimes forgetting that behind the persona lies a real person navigating the same complexities and imperfections as the rest of us. In Hollywood itself, Newman's confessions offered a rare moment of reflection. For an industry obsessed with image, his openness illuminated the often unseen pressures of fame. The constant scrutiny, the moral compromises, and the delicate balancing act between personal desire and public expectation. Newman's willingness to confront the truth, even at the very end, demonstrated a quiet courage, a refusal to allow myth alone to define him. It was a choice that reframed his legacy, transforming it from an untouchable icon to a deeply human figure whose life resonates because of, not despite, its contradictions. Beyond the personal and industry impact, Newman's story contributes to a broader cultural conversation about morality, imperfection, and legacy. In an era obsessed with celebrity perfection, his admissions are a profound reminder that admiration need not hinge on flawlessness. They invite us to engage with complexity, to acknowledge that even those we hold in the highest esteem are capable of error, temptation, and moral conflict. Newman's truth challenges the simplistic notion that greatness requires moral infallibility. Instead, it suggests that authenticity, courage, and the willingness to face one's own imperfections are what make a life truly compelling. Ultimately, Paul Newman's confessions enrich his legacy rather than diminish it. They offer a more complete picture of a man who was extraordinary, flawed, and profoundly human. His life becomes a story of duality. The celebrated public figure and the private man, the icon and the human, the perfect image and the hidden truth. This duality is what makes his story so timeless, so captivating, and so deeply resonant. Even after his death, Newman's life and confessions continue to teach and inspire. They remind us to embrace complexity, to recognize that human beings are rarely, if ever, entirely one thing. They encourage us to approach others and ourselves with empathy, understanding that mistakes, desires, and contradictions do not erase the value of a life lived fully. They demonstrate that courage is not only found in accomplishments and accolades, but also in honesty, humility, and the willingness to confront our own truths. Paul Newman's story is, in the end, a testament to humanity itself. It is a story of brilliance and imperfection, love and temptation, fame and privacy, myth and truth. It challenges us to rethink how we define greatness, and it leaves an enduring question for all who admire him. Can we accept the full measure of a person, the light and the shadow, the triumphs and the flaws, and find in that acceptance a deeper understanding of life, love, and the human heart? Paul Newman may have left the world physically, but his confessions, his humanity, and his legacy endure, reminding us that the truth, however complicated, has the power to inspire, to teach, and to illuminate the very essence of what it means to be human.